following is a video podcast from WGBH Basic Black, New England's longest-running television series devoted exclusively to the Black experience. I'm Howard Manley, and I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Deborah Prothro Stith, a pioneer in the treatment of youth violence as a public health issue. Thanks for joining us today, Doctor.
Oh, thank you for having me.
What is it? Let's get right to it. What is it about the American psyche that contributes, breeds all this youth violence that's just spreading throughout the country and has been for the...
You know, it's in our history as a country, it's in our culture. We are a society that admires violence. We teach our children to admire violence. We teach them how to be violent, and in many ways we expect them to be violent. We tell them, you go back outside and you beat him up or I'm gonna beat you. Parents will say that to kids on a regular basis. It's just a part of our culture, and we have to be much more intentional about promoting nonviolence.
Now, you have likened this to, or I think the phrase you've used is that this is a toxic environment.
Exactly.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in fact, it borrows from the work of a colleague, James Garbarino, who really talks about the socially toxic environment. And what it means is that kids on a spectrum range for those who will do everything you ask them to do to those that are mischievous and get in all kinds of trouble. But it's the environment that determines whether they are in the kind of trouble that an Amish kid might get into for decorating the buggy with brass rings, or the kind of trouble that a kid in Roxbury will get into for being the lookout for a drug dealer. So it's that socially toxic environment that includes poverty, racism, this culture of violence, the lack of popularity for things like forgiveness and getting along, and the lack of skills when it comes to conflict resolution. I mean, it's just the whole thing.
Now, what role does poverty and race play in all this? It's not that all minorities are prone to violence, but there's something. What is the link there?
Yeah, it's a very important link to understand. The issues of joblessness and underemployment and chronic poverty. William Julius Wilson, another sociologist and great author, really documents this area called the truly disadvantaged. So when you've got that on top of a culture that promotes violence as a way of solving problems, and you've got the problem of racism, which our kids experience on a regular basis, you just get double, triple doses of bad stuff.
Tell me, what role does personal responsibility, I mean, I don't want to
Right.
but where does personal responsibility come into this?
Well, it's huge. I would really relabel it, though, community responsibility, because it's important for a child, we as a society expect to be able to handle the fear, the pain, the guilt, the anger that occurs because of the violence he or she experiences. It's important for us to understand that that child has to have more than conflict resolution skills. We have to help him heal. We have to help him deal with the bad things that happen to him. So there is personal responsibility, but as adults in a community, it's really our responsibility to help children deal with the junk that's out there, but also creating them some strategies.
Well, and one of the things in one of your books, you mentioned this concept called adolescent vulnerability.
Yes.
And I think adults have to sort of understand that. What is that, and how can adults sort of relate to that and connect and get them on the right path?
If you're parenting a teenager, you know this vulnerability. And it's a bit crazy at one level, but the adolescent period normally is a period where you get a certain amount of rebellion, you get a certain amount of risk-taking, you get a certain amount of pushing away from parents. If you are going to be a healthy adult, then you have to have a different relationship with your parents than you had with your parents when you were a child.
True.
And the teen years are the years that relationship changes.
But there's also some egoism, some narcissism, and all that, where all this stuff comes out about disrespect.
Oh.
And someone talked about me. and that leads into irrational behavior.
It sure does. I mean, that narcissism really sets kids up. And again, it's a normal part of the teen years. In fact, it has to happen. You have to move to this self-love so that you can separate from your family and develop a identity. But it sets kids up. They feel center stage. They feel like they're on television 24/7. And so when there's an insult, something that most adults don't even consider an insult.
Right.
You know, for them, it's a traumatic experience.
Now, this isn't a new problem, because I'm a little tired of this being called a new problem, but for the last 5 to 10 years, you've seen a lot more attention and a lot more crimes committed by young girls.
Yes.
How did that all happen?
Well, you know, the socially toxic environment now includes entertainment for teenagers, with women and girls playing the same sort of violent superhero roles as boys and men have. I mean, in many ways, I say we've been marketing violence to girls for about 2 decades now, the way we did to boys for centuries. We've been doing it for boys for centuries. But in the last 2 decades with, you know, Kill Bill, Tomb Raider, all of that, we really are marketing it to girls, and they are learning it just like boys have.
And it's also in this context of marketing, I think you used the phrase meanness.
Yes.
Just how to be tough and how to fight back. And then you see these girls that are out on playgrounds doing more damage than boys. I mean, are there any differences between a crime committed by a female than a male in terms of violence?
Well, it's actually surprisingly very similar. The attitudes are pretty similar. The issues of enjoying beating people up and getting a reputation, some of those attitudes and perceptions are very, very similar. Girls fight girls more than they fight boys, just like boys fight boys more, so same gender violence is dominant. Girls don't use weapons as much, and in particular guns. They don't use guns as much yet. And for me, that's a very big yet, because we keep marketing it to them, and it'll be a part of their...
Now you've been researching this for 20 years. Is this startling to you?
Well, you know, at first, I was surprised to find violence on college campuses. So when I got my first call from a college, I was a little surprised. And then I said to myself, well, these are the same kids. They've learned violence, and they have very few other skills for handling. So then I was surprised when it moved so far out of the urban setting. You know, you had that concentration of poverty and racism and the attitudes, but it's very clear that we're all vulnerable. So by the time it started involving girls, I was a little less surprised, because basically we're teaching our kids to fight.